Hello everybody, my name is Manues and welcome to another Eternal Top Decks video series. Today we're going to talk about an update to Shimmerpack. Some of you may have already seen it on my stream yesterday, and people have been asking for a video. Also, I haven't really talked about Shimmerpack in quite some time, and the deck is still, or once again, one of the relevant top decks in the game. Partially proven by RrbbTT, who is currently holding rank 1 with this list. This is basically an updated version of the list he used to get to rank 1, and we together basically tuned his list towards this yesterday on stream over a couple of hours, and made the deck a lot better because he had a couple of very interesting and good ideas and directions that he took the deck in, but the deck still had room for improvement, so we worked up quite some changes. And yeah, the deck is pretty well rounded now. This is like a really nice and refined Shimmerpack list. There's still a couple of minor options for future change, but I'm gonna talk about it as I go over the list. So basically, I think the cards that we don't really need to talk about anymore these days are the 4 Initiative of the Sands, the 4 Talir's favorite, aside from the fact that I am a pretty big fan of running 4 of these rather than most people that have been running 3 in the past, especially Finkel was a big proponent of 3. But I think the card just synergizes so well with Obelisk, and even more so now that we run Vault of the Praxis, and also the fact that this deck can sometimes feel a little power light, and having more power early on to reliably hit Acolyte, which then in turn gets us to 4, which is very critical, has been pretty good, and I always like the card. And once you have Obelisk, a 1/3 is also a really good blocker against more aggressive decks. So yeah, I think the deck should always run 4. Lynx is also another card that doesn't need much talk. Kind of the removal of the deck, and usually a 4th. I can see a world where it is possible that Scaly Gruan might be better than Stormlings, but I am not sure, and I would need to test that. Gruan blocks a bit better, but the ambush has its upside, especially when playing Backlash, and the fact that it has 1 more strength also matters quite a bunch when it's not needed as a blocker, and even sometimes as a blocker. Scribe is also an auto 4th, great synergy with the deck. Amber Acolyte, basically the same. You will not find a good Shimmerpack list that runs 4. Actually, RrbbTT has initially been running 3, but that was simply a mistake, especially given that the deck is very short on viable 3-drops, and Amber Acolyte is by far the best one for the strategy. Sandstorm Titan, also not much explanation needed anymore. The card is the only really good removal target in the deck, unfortunately, but the card is just too good and too important to stabilize the deck in a lot of situations and matchups that it cannot be cut for something like Disciple, Merchant's Disciple, to make removal worse and go wider. If it would be possible, I would be the first one to do it, but Titan is just too good in this deck and too important in various, especially more aggressive matchups. So no way around it. And also Flyers would otherwise be too big of a problem. For Obelisk, also not much explanation needed. The cornerstone of the deck. You will always see 4 of this. Basically the same with Scouting Party, another one of the cards that makes the deck possible and as strong as it is. So also always 4. If you ever see a list with less than 4, just pretend it doesn't exist and play 4. And last but not least, Shimmerpack. You will always at least see 4, at least see 2. There is a chance that the deck potentially wants a 3rd, just to be a bit more reliable and have a few more high impact cards, because basically the deck mostly needs to draw an Obelisk, a party, or a Shimmerpack. Sometimes a party alone isn't enough, so it needs to draw 1 of 6 cards, and having a 7th high impact card. I mean, if we could run a 5th Obelisk, we would run a 5th Obelisk over a 3rd Shimmerpack, since the card is a bit more flexible and cheaper, but since we can't, the third Shimmerpack would be like the only option. So let's talk about the cards that need some explanation. So first off, Permafrost. This is a card that RrbbTT has initially tried and then cut because he didn't like it too much. And I mean, I can see why he didn't like it too much. The card is really not great and is very like hit or miss depending on matchups. But the thing solves a couple of problems the deck has, specifically Champion of Chaos and in general early pressure from Stone Scar and Recano decks. I mean, Permafrost is not even great against Recano, but it is a necessary evil to not get run over early while they like removal and combat trick tempo swing us. So we went back to at least 3 Permafrost. It is possible that the deck even wants the Force. The theory why we run 3 is that the card is either really bad or pretty helpful, so we didn't want to run too many, and it's only like few matchups where it's really good, like Stone Scar Burn, especially Burn Queen, the more aggressive one, being the matchup where it's the most important and the best. And in a lot of other matchups it's either like pretty so-so or even terrible, so you don't want too many. And it's not a unit for Vault of the Praxis, Shimmerpack and Obelisk, so it also doesn't synergize that well with like the core strategy of the deck. So you don't want to like flood too much on too much of those cards because it makes some of your other cards weaker. That's why there's only 3. One of the big things that RrbbTT convinced me of is main deck Backlash, since it actually solves one of the biggest problems of the deck, which is the big Hombre matchup. Like in a lot of matchups, Harsh Rule is more of a nuisance and the deck is pretty good at just fighting through it, but not against big Hombre. The problem is against big Hombre, the matchup usually goes in a way that you try to like build a board and they just put out a couple of healers and Zeraths and stuff, or like a Titan and a healer or something, and then our board is somewhat like locked out of attacking that we need to keep overextending, and they can always hold back our board with much fewer units than we have, and this deck has basically no removal, so it is impossible to break through, and then we have to like overextend, and at a certain point they can just Harsh Rule. Like even if they like let it go to a point where we Shimmerpack, they usually have enough jump blockers to not die, so they just jump block, go low, and then Harsh Rule, and at that point we are left with barely anything. Like the game always went the same before when I tested the matchup. The Shimmerpack player is forced to overextend to even be able to pressure the Combray player, and then the Combray player eventually just blows up the board, and the Shimmerpack player is left with like 2 cards, while the Combray player has the same amount or even more cards, and the individual card quality of the Combray deck is much higher. So while we left with like 2 low impact cards, they have like 2 high impact cards that on their own can easily win the game, like an Ascendant or a Great Parliament for 2 to 3 owls and stuff like that. So that's why the matchup is really bad. But Backlash changes all that, because another scenario that happens is we get in a spot where Crystallize can win the game, but then the newer Combray lists run to stand together, and then they just stand together to Crystallize to counter it, and then you're back to square one. And if you then try to overwhelm them, the Harsh Rule scenario happens, as mentioned. And Backlash basically solves both issues. Backlash allows you to win with Crystallize when Crystallize is a winning play by countering their stand together, or even their Harsh Rule. If they don't have a stand and you Crystallize, attack, but it's like a 2-turn lethal, then they Harsh Rule, and then you just Backlash the Harsh Rule and they lose the game. And the same would stand basically in like a 1-turn lethal. And also in some scenarios, Backlash on a Great Parliament can also be game breaking. So Backlash basically does everything you need against big Combray and completely changes the dynamic of the matchup. Like if we draw a Backlash or like have a Backlash in hand, we can safely throw everything on the board, since suddenly we cannot get blown out by a Harsh Rule, so we can build like a critical board, so we can win with Obelisks and Shimmerpacks or even a Crystallize. And set up a board where Crystallize is a 1-turn lethal, so even if they have stand and Harsh Rule, they stand to counter the Crystallize, we Backlash the stand and kill them before they get to their turn to Harsh Rule our board away. And Backlash has like other uses, like against Burn it's pretty good. It keeps them from like finishing us off with their burn spell, which is what they often have to do. Like the matchup gets in kind of a race and gets into a situation where they have a burn spell to kill us, and if we stop that burn spell, we probably win. So Backlash is pretty good there. And yeah, there's various like other matchups where Backlash is still fine. Like I mean, all the other more controlling decks that have lightning storms and harsh rules and stuff like that, backlashing that is still good. Like it wouldn't be super necessary for those matchups because you can often grind through a harsh rule out of say Armory or some other fringe control deck fairly well due to cards like Party and them not having enough board presence to stall us and make us overextend into the harsh rule. But yeah, Backlash makes it easier and cements those matchups even more. So yeah, Backlash is pretty great. Like he had initially had 4, and we talked about that 4 is probably a bit much because there's a bunch of matchups where the card is pretty lackluster, especially more aggressive decks, and drawing too many too early in a lot of matchups can make the deck weaker. So 3 is probably the right number in the main deck, and the 4 would be in the sideboard for a tournament for the matchups where it really shines. Next off we have Wump. The card's not great, but the thing is like we need a certain amount of units, and we also need 3-drops specifically because the deck really lacks 3-drops. And Wump has a couple of nice applications, like the deal 1 damage pops like player Aegis, which is not like a big deal, but it means that Backlash can deal 2 damage, so it's like a minor damage upgrade against Aegis, which is not a lot, but it matters. It also like matters in the sense that if Wump itself breaks the Aegis, then the follow-up scouting party shooting for 4 gets to deal 4 rather than get eaten by the Aegis. And like the biggest utility you usually have is like finishing off a relic weapon. Like it can, for example, kill an unenhanced Auric Runehammer, which actually comes up a bunch. So that's some nice utility. And other than that, the biggest like gain from playing Wump is basically it makes scouting parties better in the sense that it makes them bigger, and it also allows us to immediately draw 4 cards and deal 4 damage to the opponent if we have a Wump in play, which makes Wump actually more impact than he seems, because the opponent will often aggressively try to get rid of it out of fear of a scouting party, whether we have one or not, because they don't know if we have one or not. So usually it will get aggressively silenced or killed, which is nice. So it's basically sort of like a 3-power removal magnet with upside that is a unit for stuff like Vault and Obelisk and Shimmerpack. So it's not great, but it does the job, and there's really not many good alternatives. Like, sure, you could play Wasp, which has other upsides. It's also a unit, can sometimes be like an okay removal, but it's also like not great. And in like the slower grindier matchups, the instant draw 4 on parties and extra pump on party is actually a pretty relevant option. But yeah, if you really hate Wump, probably play 2 Wasps instead. But Wump overall is a bit better in my opinion and RrbbTT's experience. Like RrbbTT had some Wasps at some point and he really hated them, and I can see why. Like the card just doesn't do a ton. The next thing is Displacer. Basically the initial list from RrbbTT had 4 Disciples here and 0 Displacer. The thing is basically Displacer is all in all mostly a better Disciple, since basically in the slow matchups where you want sort of like the 2-for-1 body, this usually still allows you to do that. Like against slow decks, Displacer still often gets to bounce like an Acolyte, a Temple Scribe, or Talir's favorite to have like sort of a pseudo 2-for-1 that draws you a power or an actual card. And even drawing a power is usually fine in Shimmerpack in a lot of stages because you want to get to 8 for Obelisk and Shimmerpack. So and there's that. And sometimes it even like gets to rebuy like a unit that is stunned by Permafrost, so it's also like a Permafrost removal in some of those matchups, and gets like a 2-for-1 that way. And if we have Vault out, it's still a draw card with Vault, except that it costs 6 mana, but it's like 6 power, but that's not that big of a deal in the matchups where we want that, because Vault is only like for the slow, stally, grindy matchups, and they usually have the time to pay the extra power. But the big deal is that in the more problematic matchups, especially Burn and Rakano, and the card is just so much better, because against Rakano you often lose against like a quick draw unit with a hammer or a plate on it. Praxis Displacer solves that conveniently by returning the unit, bouncing the unit to their hand, and basically destroying the weapon. So that solves a lot there and buys us a lot of time and gives us the potential tempo to like turn the game on them in an otherwise pretty bad matchup. And similar against Burn, especially Big Burn, but also Burn Queen, bouncing stuff like a Champion of Chaos or bigger, especially Impending Doom and Reaper, is a huge deal and an insane tempo swing, and exactly what Shimmerpack needs in those matchups, because that allows the Shimmerpack to actually raise, because these decks are fairly bad at blocking because they need their units to attack and pressure us, because the longer the game goes, the better it gets for us. So they usually don't have many blockers, usually only like the one unit they just played, and then you just Displacer, bounce that 3-drop or 4-drop, and attack with a bunch of small units, and all of a sudden you'll quickly get into a position where you are ahead in the race and you are winning the race against Burn, and that's where the game falls apart for them and they struggle to try and stabilize, and the Shimmerpack deck can take over. So Displacer is overall just like a more flexible card than Disciple, while Disciple is usually like very mediocre, just like a bunch of random bodies. Sure, the Scorpion can sometimes be nice and good, but that's like about it. The rest is just like random bodies, while Displacer generates a lot of tempo, can solve a lot of problems, and still like has the draw 2 for with like Displacer alone, basically with Vault, if you have something in play that is cheap, which usually isn't that hard. And it also makes party better, because there's a lot of scenarios where the opponent has to balance pressuring us and racing and protecting himself against party, and then Displacering like the best blocker against party is a big tempo swing, and then party can draw cards, and drawing into like some Permafrosts and more Displacer or something like that is an easy way to tempo swing the game in our favor. So yeah, Displacer over Disciple makes a lot of sense and also has been feeling really good. And as you saw earlier, RrbbTT just told me that since our changes, his current win rate is like 76%. I mean, the sample size is really small, but yeah, the deck is feeling really great and performing really great for him. So the changes really pay off. Initially, RrbbTT had 3 Vault. While I get why he wants Vault, basically for like the slower, grindier matchups, especially big Hombre, when the game comes to a halt, this allows you to like extend on the board without losing card advantage, and also allows you to draw cards to hit stuff like Obelisk, Crystallize, Scouting Party, Shimmerpack, and Backlash, the cards you basically want the most in a situation like that, especially these 12 cards, but also potentially Backlash to protect the board state. So that's why there's 2. 2 is like a decent number to have it in like the mid to late game in the matchups where it matters, without having it too often early on, and especially in matchups where you can't afford to play a 4 power card that doesn't do anything, like aggressive decks, all the Stone Scar decks and Rakano decks, for example. So yeah, that's 2 Vault basically. Older lists usually had like a mix of Disciples and Displacers in these 6 slots. And yeah, we decided we want 4 Displacer and 2 Vault for the given reasons. Next off, we have to Crystallize. These are fairly standard by now. They give the deck another angle of attack. Like, you don't always have Shimmerpack or Obelisk, and sometimes Obelisk is not enough to get through. And Crystallize is a great way to get a party through to draw 4 cards, and also a great way when we have a decent board to set up like a 1 or 2 turn lethal. Just Crystallize the opponent board that they have been using to stall out our smaller units, and just attack the next turn again to win the game. So Crystallize has been really great and has been doing a lot of work, and is important in some matchups like Big Hombre to win those and some other like beefier mid-range decks. So yeah. I think that covers all like the less typical cards that need some more explanation. And power-wise, the power base is basically the same as ever, 25 power with the same distribution all the time. I can only strongly advise to not run any monuments in 25 power. It is reasonable to consider 26 power with 1 to 2 monuments. We had that actually during testing yesterday for a while, but we went down to 25 no monuments again to make room for the Permafrost, and also because the monuments felt so like they were pretty solid. They're nice with stuff like Crystallize to have like more beefy board, and they're a decent blocker, but they are not that great for like Vault in the sense that they're pretty expensive units, so it's harder to play them alongside another unit in a turn and stuff. But yeah, I could see myself, for example, if we want the Force Permafrost, I could easily see myself maybe just sucking up the fact that we have no 3-drops other than Acolyte and cut the Wumps for like another Permafrost and a Monument, and probably cut a Time Sigil for another Monument, or even like a Primal Sigil and play like an Amber Monument and a Cobalt Monument to have like one of each, to not cripple the potential for turn 1 Initiate of the Sands, for example. Although the blue monument is worse in the sense that it's a much worse turn 1 play. Like there will be a lot of hands where you have Temple Scribe, so you can't really play the blue monument turn 1 to get around the depleted downside, while Amber Monument is always a good turn 1 depleted play if you don't have Initiate of the Sands, because it still allows you to turn 2 Temple Scribe easily. So it is like a close call between like 7 Time Sigils and 2 Ember Monuments, or like 8 Time Sigils, 4 Primal Sigils, and like 1 Cobalt, 1 Emerald, 1 Amber Monument if you run 26 and 2 Monuments. But yeah, the 26 with 2 Monuments is a nice way to up the power count a bit, because I have a fair share of games still where I'm struggling with power, and if the deck like gets stuck on 3 or 4 power, it's really bad for this deck. It really wants to like consistently drop power, and adding some like an extra power total and balancing that by turning one of the 25 power into a monument gives the deck a good flood screw protection, like ups the flood screw protection really nicely, and might be the right way to go. It hurts a bit to give up 2 more cheaper units that fix a curve in the hole, like a hole in the curve, and also work better with Vault of the Praxis, since a 3 power unit is like a good cost for like a turn 5 Vault trigger, for example, while the monuments aren't. But the monuments to some extent can be played like on turn 3 with a 2-drop, and like the Force Permafrost that we add also gives us like a 2-drop and a Permafrost as a 3 power play, for example. So that is definitely an option if we feel like the deck wants or needs the Force Permafrost, for example. Alright, that covers all regarding the deck list. The deck, this version really like got me back onto Shimmerpack and made me much more excited and interested in the archetype relative to how I felt in the past about the deck. Like I have not been very happy with the deck, but yeah, this list solves a lot of what I have been unhappy with, and is very thought out and well rounded and well balanced. So thanks to RrbbTT for like pushing the deck into that direction, and working out this list together yesterday on stream was like a very fruitful exchange and discussion. I'll link to his initial Reddit post with his with the list that we started from, and the proof of him being rank 1, getting to rank 1 with the deck, and also still being rank 1 with the deck, for anyone that's interested. So shout out to RrbbTT for doing such a nice work. RrbbTT basically started like 1.5 months ago playing Eternal, has like no CCG background basically, only has played poker in the past, and according to him got most of his like Eternal related skill and knowledge from my channel and my YouTube videos. So super excited to hear that. It's really great to see that it helps people so much getting into the game and getting that good that quickly, like 1.5 months, no CCG background to rank 1 by like finding my channel and like watching my content and using that as a base to make your own thoughts and come up with like ideas and solutions for problems, like tuning Shimmerpack to solve the issues the deck has in the metagame, basically. Alright, so enough talk for the deck tech. Time to play some games as usual with the deck. Currently at rank 11. Did some pretty good climbing, mostly with this deck on stream yesterday. So back at high level masters. Time to battle. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and stay tuned for the games in a moment. Thanks for watching. Bye.